Hey, welcome to the Sunnah Sleeper. Tonight we're drifting into a peaceful corner of Islamic history, a story about one man's lifelong search for the truth. A journey that began in the mountains of Persia, passed through temples and churches, crossed deserts and rivers, and finally reached the blessed city of Medina. This isn't a story about armies or empires. It's not the story of a ruler or a conqueror. This is the story of a seeker, a man who couldn't rest until he found the truth his heart was longing for. It's about patience, it's about hope, and it's about how Allah guides the one who truly wants to be guided, even if the road is long, and even if it's full of tests. Our companion tonight is Salman the Persian, or as history remembers him with love and respect, Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu. He began life as the son of a wealthy landowner in Persia, surrounded by fire temples and tall mountains. But his heart led him far from home, all the way to the messenger of Allah himself. So if you're listening in bed, maybe dim the lights a little, let the day's worries fade into the background, and imagine yourself stepping quietly into a time before electricity, before cars, before the hum of our busy world. Back to a time when a handful of believers changed the course of history. Tonight we walk beside Salman, and our journey begins in the cool mountain air of Persia. In the heart of Persia, where the mountains rose high and snow still clung to their peaks even in the warmer months, there was a small town surrounded by gardens and flowing streams. The winters were crisp and white, the summers bright and warm. Salman was born here, in a home filled with comfort and security. His father was not just wealthy, but respected, a man deeply devoted to the Zoroastrian faith, which worshipped fire. In their town stood a tall fire temple, its flame carefully guarded so it never went out. Day and night, priests fed it with dry wood, protecting it from wind and rain. From a young age, Salman's father loved him dearly, perhaps too dearly. He would say, "You are the apple of my eye, my most precious treasure." Out of love, he kept Salman close, so close that the boy rarely left the house on his own. He wanted his son to follow in his footsteps, guarding the sacred fire and leading their people in worship. Salman obeyed. He learned the rituals. He stood in the temple, watching the golden flames dance and flicker, feeling their warmth on his face. But sometimes he would wonder, why did the fire need people to keep it alive? If it was divine, why couldn't it burn on its own forever? These thoughts would come and go, like clouds passing over the sun. One day when Salman was still a young man, his father asked him to check on their farmland. The morning air was cool and the road curved gently between hills. As he walked, Salman heard something unusual. Voices, soft and melodic, rising and falling like waves. It wasn't the chant of the fire temple. Curiosity tugged at him. He followed the sound until he reached a small building. Inside, people stood shoulder to shoulder, then bowed, then lowered their heads to the ground in a kind of prostration. There were no flames, no idols, only a simple space and voices calling upon one God. Salman stepped closer. The people inside noticed him but did not stop. When the prayer ended, he asked who they were. They told him they were Christians, worshiping the creator of the heavens and the earth, the one without partner, who made everything and needs nothing from his creation. Something inside Salman's chest stirred. He didn't understand all their words, but the peace in their faces, the way their worship was simple and direct. It made sense to him in a way the fire temple never had. When he returned home, he told his father about what he'd seen, but his father grew alarmed. "My son, your religion is better than theirs," he said firmly. "Stay away from them." Out of fear of losing him, his father locked him inside their home. But the seed had already been planted. Salman's heart was no longer satisfied with the rituals of the fire temple. He began to think about the Christians every day, about their prayers, their God, and the peace he had felt in that little building. Days turned into weeks, and his desire to learn more only grew. Finally, when he managed to speak secretly to one of them again, he asked, "Where does this religion come from?" They told him, "From the land of Sham, Syria. That is where it is practiced in its purest form." That night, Salman lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the cold mountain wind whispered through the trees. Inside, his heart whispered something else. "You have to go." It was a thought that would change his forever. Salman's heart was restless. The days in his father's home felt longer now. The familiar smell of burning wood in the fire temple no longer brought him comfort. His thoughts were always far away, wandering through that little Christian place of worship, wondering about the land they spoke of, Syria, or as the locals called it, Sham. One morning, after weeks of quiet planning in his mind, Salman decided he couldn't stay. His father's love was deep, but it was also a cage, locking him away from the truth his heart was chasing. And so, he waited for the right moment, when the household was busy, when no one was watching. The mountains were calm that day, their snow caps glowing in the afternoon sun. The air was cool but bright, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Salman wrapped himself in a simple cloak, took a small pouch of coins, and began to walk toward the road that led out of his village. Every step felt both heavy and light. Heavy because he was leaving the only home he'd ever known. Light because his heart whispered that this was the way forward. He didn't know if he would ever see his father again. He didn't know what would happen on the road, but he knew he couldn't turn back. By the grace of Allah, he came across a caravan preparing to leave for Syria. The traders were loading camels with goods, sacks of grain, pottery, and woven fabrics. Salman approached them and asked if he could travel alongside them in exchange for payment. They agreed, and by sunset, the caravan was already making its way out of Persia. The journey was long. Days melted into nights, and nights into days. The sun would rise over the horizon like a golden coin, and by afternoon it would hang heavy and hot in the sky. At night, the desert air turned cold, and the stars glittered like scattered pearls across the black sky. Sometimes the wind would sing low through the dunes, and Salman would lie awake, wondering what awaited him at the end of this road. Weeks later, they finally entered Syria. The air there felt different, warmer, filled with the scents of olives, fresh bread, and spices from the bustling markets. Stone buildings lined the streets, and everywhere there were people speaking in a language that was new to Salman. He began asking for the most knowledgeable Christian leader in the area. People pointed him to a bishop who lived in a large, simple building near the heart of the town. Salman went to him and said, "I wish to live with you, to learn from you, and to serve you in your needs." The bishop agreed, and for the first time in his life, Salman was free to study another way of worship. He joined the bishop in prayer, in reading, and in daily work. But as the weeks passed, Salman noticed something troubling. The bishop often spoke about charity, urging the people to give for the sake of God. Yet instead of distributing the wealth to the poor, he would hide it away in a secret storehouse. This weighed heavily on Salman's heart. The truth he sought was not in empty words. It had to be in both belief and action. His time with the bishop taught him one important lesson. Not everyone who claims to follow the truth truly lives by it. Eventually, the bishop passed away. The community gathered, and Salman told them about his corruption. Shocked, they opened the storehouse and found gold and silver hidden away. The people then appointed another man to lead them. A man Salman found to be honest, kind, and sincere in his worship. For years, Salman stayed under this man's care, learning more about the worship of the one God, and living among people who at least tried to follow what he preached. His heart began to heal from the disappointment of the first bishop, but time moves forward for all. Eventually, this good man grew old and ill. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Salman sat by his teacher's side. "My son," the old man said softly, "my time is near. I do not know anyone left in this world who follows our way as I do, except for one man in Mosul. Go to him, and you will find someone who worships Allah in truth." Salman's heart ached at the thought of another farewell, but his journey had always been one of movement, one teacher leading him to another, one city opening the road to the next. And so he prepared once again to leave, carrying with him not only his few possessions, but also the growing light of faith in his heart. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the next chapter of his search awaited. Salman's journey from Syria to Mosul was not short, and it was not easy. The road wound through valleys and rocky hills, where the wind carried the scent of wild herbs and distant rain. Some nights, the moonlight would silver the path ahead, making the world look almost magical. Other nights, the clouds would gather, and the darkness would press close, with only the soft shuffle of donkey hooves or the gentle breathing of camels to break the silence. In Mosul, Salman found the man his teacher had spoken of, a Christian monk who lived simply, with little more than a small home and a place for prayer. This man welcomed Salman warmly. For a time, it felt like his search might be ending. But just as before, the seasons changed, and so did life. The monk grew weak with age, and one day, as they shared bread and water, he took Salman's hand. "My son," he said, "I see the same light in you that I saw in the one who sent you to me. When I leave this world, seek out another man in Nisibis, for he worships Allah in the way we do." And so Salman set out again. Nisibis was a lively place, merchants selling cloth and pottery in the streets, children running between the stalls, the smell of roasted meat drifting in the air. But Salman did not come for trade or comfort. He came for the man who could take him one step closer to the truth. The teacher in Nisibis was humble and quiet, spending much of his day in prayer and fasting. Under his guidance, Salman learned more about patience, sincerity, and the worship of Allah without partners. It was peaceful, yet time is always moving. Years passed, and the teacher of Nisibis also grew ill. By now, Salman was familiar with this kind of moment, sitting beside someone who had guided him, feeling the sadness of goodbye mixed with the hope of a new chapter. "My son," the teacher whispered, "there is only one left that I know of who still follows this way. He lives in Amaria. Go to him and stay with him until Allah opens another path for you." Salman listened, nodded, and prepared once more to leave. The road to Amaria was long and dusty, stretching over plains where the horizon seemed endless. But when he arrived, he found the man he was looking for, an old monk with eyes that seemed to carry decades of wisdom. His home was plain, his food simple, and his words always gentle. For the first time in his life, Salman felt truly settled. He stayed in Amaria for years, working to earn a living, planting crops, and studying the faith. The seasons turned many times over, spring bringing flowers, summer bringing long warm days, autumn turning the leaves gold, and winter wrapping the land in frost. But one winter, as the wind howled outside, the old monk fell ill. Salman stayed close, caring for him in his final days. On the last evening, when the fire burned low and the air was still, the monk called Salman to his side. "My son," he said softly, "there is no one left on the earth who follows this way as I do. But listen carefully, the time of the final prophet is near. He will come in the land of the Arabs between two stretches of black volcanic rock. That land will be full of palm trees. He will accept gifts, but not charity. And between his shoulders will be the seal of prophethood." Salman's heart raced as he listened. These were not vague words. They were signs, clear, specific signs, that could guide him to the man he had been searching for his whole life. The monk continued, "If you can reach him, follow him. He is the one." Not long after, the old monk returned to Allah, and Salman buried him with his own hands. He stood for a long time at the grave, feeling the weight of yet another farewell. But this time, there was something different. He carried with him not just the teachings of another man, but the description of the one who could end his search. Salman stayed in Amaria for a while longer, working and saving what he could. Then, when he had enough, he joined a caravan heading toward the Arabian Peninsula. He imagined the date palms, the lava plains, and the humble man with the seal between his shoulders. He didn't know that the journey would not go as planned. He didn't know that before finding the prophet, he would taste the bitterness of slavery. But for now, hope was stronger than fear, and the road stretched ahead like a promise. The caravan from Amaria rolled steadily southward, its line of camels swaying like ships on a golden sea of sand. The sky stretched wide and clear above, and each night the stars spilled across it in dazzling patterns, as if the heavens themselves were guiding Salman toward his destiny. The men in the caravan spoke of markets, trade, and profits, but Salman's thoughts were elsewhere. He carried the description of the final prophet in his heart like a treasure. A land between two lava plains filled with palm trees. A man who accepts gifts but not charity. And a seal of prophethood between his shoulders. The journey was long, and sometimes the wind would whip up sudden sandstorms, turning the day into a blur of stinging grit. Other times the air would fall still, and the desert would feel like it was holding its breath. But no matter the weather, Salman pressed forward. Then one day his path took a sudden and cruel turn. Somewhere along the route, the caravan betrayed him. The men who had once shared bread and water with him seized him without warning. They bound his hands, took his belongings, and treated him not as a fellow traveler, but as a prize to be sold. Salman was now a captive. They brought him to the slave markets, crowded places where people were examined like livestock, their value debated in loud, sharp voices. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and desperation. Salman, who had once been the son of a respected man in Persia, now stood with ropes around his wrists, waiting for strangers to decide his fate. Eventually, he was bought by a man from a tribe called Banu Qurayza, who lived in Yathrib, a city that one day would be known to the world as Medina. The road to Yathrib was shorter than the long miles he had traveled before, but each step was heavy now. When they arrived, Salman noticed something almost immediately. The land was filled with date palms. Their long, slender trunks swayed gently in the breeze, their fronds whispering against the sky. His heart quickened. This was one of the signs the old monk had told him about. Could it be? But his days were not his own anymore. Salman was put to work in the groves, tending the date palms, carrying heavy loads, and laboring from sunrise to sunset. The sun in Yathrib was hotter than in Persia, and the work was backbreaking. Sometimes his muscles ached so badly he could barely sleep at night. And yet, even in chains, Salman's heart was watchful. He had come so far. Perhaps Allah had brought him here for a reason. Time passed. The seasons in Yathrib moved in a rhythm of planting, harvesting, and resting the soil. Salman learned to tell when the dates were sweet enough to pick just by the scent in the air. He worked silently, always listening to the conversations of those around him. Then one day, whispers began to spread among the people. There was talk of a man in Makkah, someone claiming to be a prophet, who was calling people to worship only Allah. At first, Salman could only catch fragments of the news, but then the whispers grew louder. This man had now left Makkah and was making his way to Yathrib. The people were calling it a hijrah, a migration. Salman's heart pounded. Could this be the man? Could this be the final prophet he had been searching for since he left his home in Persia? When the prophet finally arrived in Yathrib, the city was alive with excitement. People lined the streets to greet him. They sang songs of welcome, and the air was filled with joy. But Salman could not simply walk away from his master to meet him. He had to wait for the right moment. And so he listened. He observed. He thought of the signs. Between two lava plains, Yathrib was indeed between two stretches of black, volcanic rock, a land filled with palm trees. Everywhere he looked, the date palms swayed. Two signs matched. One remained to be tested. Salman began to plan quietly. He would find a way to test the prophet, gently, respectfully, but enough to know for certain if this was the man his teachers had described. The chains around his wrists and the weight of slavery could not stop the fire of hope burning in his heart. He had come too far to give up now. The day Salman first heard that the prophet had arrived in Yathrib, the city was alive with excitement. It was as if the streets themselves were smiling. Men, women, and children hurried to see him, their faces glowing with curiosity and joy. Salman, however, could not rush to join them. He was still bound by the duties of slavery, his master's orders keeping him tied to the date groves. The sound of distant voices, laughter, and songs reached him through the rustling of palm leaves, making his heart ache. He remembered the three signs the last monk had told him. He will live in a land between two lava plains. It will be a land with many date palms. He will accept gifts, but not charity, and between his shoulders will be the seal of prophethood. Two of these signs had already matched. Only one remained. That evening, Salman worked quietly, his mind racing. The next morning, he took what little food he could gather, dates he had saved from his own share, and wrapped them carefully. He walked to where the prophet was staying, his steps slow but his heart pounding. When he arrived, he saw him sitting with his companions. The prophet's face was calm, gentle, and full of light, unlike any face Salman had ever seen. Salman approached and said, "I have heard you are a stranger in this town. Here is some food I have brought as charity. I thought perhaps you might need it." The prophet took the food, thanked him, and passed it to his companions, but did not eat from it himself. Salman watched closely. His heart leapt. This matched the sign exactly. The prophet did not eat from charity. Still, Salman needed to be sure. A few days later, he prepared more food and went to see the prophet again. This time he said, "I have brought you this as a gift." The prophet smiled, thanked him, and ate from it, then shared it with his companions. 2 signs had been confirmed. Only one remained, the seal of prophethood. Some days later, Salman went to the prophet when he was attending a funeral. The prophet was wearing 2 sheets, and as he lowered himself to sit, Salman moved quietly behind him, hoping to glimpse the seal, a small, raised mark between his shoulders that his teacher had described. And there it was. It was like a cluster of flesh, small but distinct, sitting on his upper back between his shoulder blades. Salman's heart could no longer hold back. He stepped forward, tears welling in his eyes, and bent down to kiss the seal. Then, unable to stop himself, he began to cry. The prophet turned to him with kindness and asked his story. Salman sat and told him everything. From his days in Persia, guarding the fire temple, to meeting the Christians, to moving from teacher to teacher, to finally being sold into slavery and arriving in the city. When he finished, the prophet smiled and praised Allah for guiding Salman to the truth. And in that moment, Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu declared his faith. "I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." The years of searching, the miles of walking, the countless farewells, every hardship, every tear, had brought him to this very moment. But Salman was still a slave. His heart was now free, but his body remained in chains. The prophet placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Make a contract with your master for your freedom, and we will help you fulfill it." It was a promise, and for Salman, it was the beginning of the final part of his journey, not just to truth, but to freedom. That night as he lay down, the air in Yathrib was cool and still. The palm fronds whispered gently in the breeze, and above him, the stars shone quietly. For the first time in years, Salman slept with a heart at peace. Salman had found the truth. His heart was free, but his hands still worked under the orders of his master, and his body still carried the weight of chains, if not made of iron, then made of obligation. The prophet, with his deep kindness and care, encouraged Salman to speak with his master. Salman approached him respectfully and said, "Let me make a contract with you so that I may earn my freedom." The man agreed, but his price was heavy. He demanded 300 date palms to be planted and 40 ounces of gold. It was an impossible sum for a slave. Salman owned nothing but the clothes on his back. Yet the moment the prophet heard of this agreement, he called upon his companions. "Help your brother," he told them. The Muslims came together without hesitation. Some brought young palm shoots, others offered tools, others came ready to dig. It was a scene of brotherhood, men working side by side, the sound of shovels in the earth, the scent of fresh soil in the warm air. Salman stood among them, his heart swelling with gratitude. This was not like the wealth-hoarding bishop he had once known, nor the empty rituals of the fire temple. This was a community of people who truly lived by what they believed, helping each other for the sake of Allah alone. When all 300 palms were ready, the prophet himself planted one of them with his blessed hands. Not a single tree failed to grow. Then came the gold. One day the prophet received a gift, a piece of gold the size of an egg. He called Salman and said, "Take this, Salman, and give it to your master to fulfill your contract." Salman waited carefully. It was enough to pay the final part of his freedom, and so at last, after years of searching and years of labor, Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu became a free man. From that day on, Salman was not just a companion of the prophet. He was a brother in faith, an advisor in times of trial, and a humble servant of Allah. One of the most famous moments in his later life came during the Battle of the Trench. When the Quraysh and their allies marched to attack Medina, the Muslims gathered to plan their defense. Salman, drawing from his Persian background, suggested digging a massive trench around the exposed side of the city. It was an unusual idea for Arabia, but the Prophet accepted it. The trench worked, and the siege was broken without the enemy ever breaching the city's defenses. From then on, Salman was remembered not just for his journey, but for his wisdom and contribution to the safety of the Muslims. Yet despite his closeness to the Prophet and his respect among the companions, Salman lived humbly. When he later became the governor of a region, he still cooked his own meals, mended his own clothes, and slept on the ground. People would sometimes find him carrying goods in the market, and he would smile and say, "I came into this world with nothing, and I will leave it with nothing." He never forgot the long road that had brought him here, the snowy mountains of Persia, the quiet churches of Sham, the dusty roads of Nisibis and Amariah, the chains of slavery, the whisper of palm leaves in Medina, and finally, the face of the Prophet. When Salman was near the end of his life, some of his friends asked him about everything he had been through. He said something simple, yet powerful. "I was seeking the truth, and Allah guided me to Islam. Even if I had to crawl on my knees from the east to the west to find it, it would have been worth it." And so the boy who once guarded the fire in a temple far away became a man who guarded the light of faith in his heart until his last breath. And that is the journey of Salman the Persian radiallahu anhu. A seeker, a traveler, a man who crossed lands and languages, wealth and slavery, comfort and hardship, all to reach the truth. His story reminds us that no step taken toward Allah is ever wasted, and that guidance is a gift worth more than all the treasures in the world. Thank you for listening tonight. May your own path, wherever it takes you, be filled with signs, ease, and the peace of knowing that Allah never turns away the one who sincerely seeks Him.